Waves of protests have hit New Delhi as the Indian Supreme Court refused to delay the implementation of a controversial citizenship law. Demonstrations have now gone on for a week, with at least 6 people dead and dozens wounded. The court says that it will only consider petitions challenging the law next month. The new legislation applies to non-Muslims who are in India illegally, but who can demonstrate religious persecution in neighboring Bangladesh, Pakistan and Afghanistan. Critics say it goes against the spirit of the country's secular constitution, but Prime Minister Narendra Modi has defended it as a humanitarian gesture. For more, our correspondent Neha Punya joins us live from New Delhi. Neha, how have citizens responded to the Supreme Court's announcement?
Reactions have been mixed, which is understandable given how this citizenship law has sharply divided public opinion in the country. Many people who support the BJP have welcomed the fact that the Supreme Court didn't see the need to strike down this law immediately. They're hopeful, they say, that even when that hearing commences in a month's time, the Supreme Court will side with the government and view this as a humanitarian bill that will give refuge to persecuted minorities from India's neighboring countries. But many others, the protesters, the students who've been holding agitations for a week now, say they're disappointed that the Supreme Court didn't pay heed to the public sentiment that's against this bill. And in spite of that, they're saying they're hoping that when that hearing commences, where those 60 petitions get taken up and the Supreme Court reads out the government's response to why this bill should not be labelled unconstitutional and scrapped, they're hoping that there will be a light at the end of the tunnel, that this legislation will eventually be struck down, if not immediately.
Neha, protest action focused on New Delhi now, although it did start in the northeast. Why the shift?
That's right. It started in the northeast because that's where we saw a whole group of protesters, locals mostly, coming out onto the streets soon after that legislation was passed in both houses of parliament. Those protesters weren't worried about this bill being biased towards one community, particularly Muslims. They were worried about the unchecked migration that the border states of India and the northeast would see from Bangladesh. And they were saying that the demographic of the region will change. There will be a shortage of jobs, and that's why they were agitating against this bill. We had the army deployed there, and the situation was brought quickly under control, and since then things have resumed to normal in the northeastern states of India. But earlier this week on Sunday, we saw a big gathering here in Delhi where there was a brutal police crackdown, and many students have responded to that crackdown that served as a catalyst, getting many students out onto the streets. We're now seeing 3 days of student protests taking place in at least 17 Indian cities, and they're not just protesting against police high-handedness, as they're calling it, but also against the government for refusing to engage with them. And they're saying they will continue demonstrating until the government sees reason, or until there is some sort of word from the Supreme Court on this legislation.
All right, many thanks for that, Neha Punya, speaking to us from New Delhi.